Hey Foundry, I want to give you a little bit of a sense into a morning routine and both a good habit and a bad habit that I have, right? The good habit is that I like to drink good coffee, and I brew my coffee in the morning through a mode of coffee making called a Chemex filter, which is really just a fancy way to say pouring hot water over grounds. And the upside of that is, of course, it's very good. I like that, right? Like, it's good flavor. The downside of that is that my coffee over the course of that morning doesn't stay like on a heater or on a burner. It gets pretty cold. And so as we live out this grind, pun intended, one of the things that happens for me is as I have a cup in the morning and then I go get ready and I go to leave out the door, is that to refill my coffee cup and to be on the go means that I've got to reheat my coffee. And when I do that, one of the frequent bad habits that I have is that I leave the house with the coffee cup that I've had to put into the microwave in my hand rather than transfer it to this cupboard full of like Yeti mugs and travel mugs and promotional gift items that I've been given along the way. So when I get to my door, I go to lock the door or I get to my car, frequently what happens is that this hot cup of coffee that's been reheated for me to fuel my day ends up in one of three places: my hand burning me, my clothes staining me, or the ground or the car. And while my car appreciates that there's probably worse things for your car to smell like, the reality is all along the way, this is so easily prevented by simply taking this step, this extra step of transferring this thing that I've heated into something that was actually intended to carry it in a traveling manner, right? It's not practical to have a backpack and my arms loaded and to be walking on the streets of Baltimore, or worse, driving on the streets of Baltimore without a way to carry my grind in a particularly wise way. But one of the things that's so true of us, and it's the conviction of the series that we're in, is that to slow down our grind, to change our habits, to think strategically about the things that we are doing often is easier said than done. The invitation to a deeply formed life is not the invitation just to change all of the circumstances surrounding the moment that we're in, because that's really frankly impossible for any of us to do. The goal for us over the course of these few weeks is to begin to think about, how do we carry our burdens properly? How do we carry this cultural moment with a practice-based view of some inputs that we can put into the soil of our hearts that will help us bear fruit in a moment of trial? Today we want to look at this idea of what it means to live a life of interior examination on a world that just kind of lives at the surface level. To think and to be alive about the dimensions of our interior that are often repressed, ignored, sometimes even explained away by Bible verses in the name of respectability. And so as we consider our inner worlds today, we're going to take a look at the Psalms, specifically Psalm 139. The Psalms, if you're not familiar, are a collection of 150 poems and songs that really kind of serve as the songbook for God's people. They're a collection of anger, sadness, reflection, truth-telling, praises, questions, lament, feelings, real human feelings that are a part of understanding and pointing to where hope is found. And so when we look at the 139th Psalm, which is what we'll do today, we get a sense of the need for this kind of work. David, the psalmist of Psalm 139, says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." The big idea of that conclusion, though it's a poem, David's big idea is that, hey, you know what? Like, the way to getting to the life everlasting that God has carved out for us is on some level testing and understanding the hidden motivations of our character, the ways in which our anxiety is driving us. And so how do we begin to do that well? We're not going to exegete every verse in Psalm 139, but we want to look at Psalm 139 as a posture that's reflective in other Psalms as well about what it means to live below the surface or to carry our burdens and our anxieties properly. First, this psalm reminds us of the importance of making time for interior examination. To make time to say, hey, search me, know me, test me, help me to see the things that below the surface are troubling to me. Now, we don't like this kind of thing, right? A lot of us maybe have symptoms that we should probably go talk to a doctor about, but we kind of don't want to know what's going on, and it's a struggle for us to make the appointment or make the call. It's much easier for us to go, I'm probably good. Right? For me, recently, I had a bite on my leg from a tick, and I wanted so desperately for there to be nothing going on, but I knew the reality of if I don't make the call and I don't figure out what's up there, a bad thing could be brewing inside me, right? And so the reality of dealing with the interior life is that it's often more unpleasant than just running at a pace that goes, oh, I'm sure it's fine. What a lot of us will do is the temptation of leaders like David is just to live extravagantly on the surface, to make the external situation look good, to make it look like I'm carrying really well all of the burdens of this moment. And if we look at one another's social medias, it can be really easy to fall into this trap of comparison. Man, they really look like they're winning at COVID, like they're excelling at dealing with all of the mess. But here's what I know about myself. What it's to acknowledge there is that it's easy to see the externals others are putting out when we know in our own internal processes the things that may be difficult for us. When David says to search me and to know me, and that finds freedom in that, here's what he's ultimately doing. The chapter begins, Psalm 139 begins with the acknowledgement that God already knows what's going on. That you've searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. He says later in verses 7 and 8, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle in the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Here's what he acknowledges. God, you already know what's going on. None of my life is a mystery to you, but it's often a mystery to us. We're often the last to know the things that evidence that the externals maybe look good, but below the surface, if we're not honest, bad things are brewing. And what David shows us here in this moment is the power of interior examination, taking the time to get below the surface to our motivations, to not just look the part, but to really ask ourselves, are we living into the life everlasting, to find freedom in the ways of God intersecting with the ways in which we're living. So David's not a perfect guy. I don't know if you know that. David had some moments where we see in the scripture a way less than glamorous way of living. And the reality for us is one of the things what we can find freedom in the scriptures is that the scriptures do not hide the character flaws of so many of the people who occupy the pages of the scriptures that we get to see. We often preach about maybe one event from their life at a time or one thing in their life at a time. But what we really see in David in particular is that even when David has fallen in his life, the restoration in David's story often comes as a result of slowing down and processing the things, the motivations, the events that he's struggled with. We're called to be people of examination, not just people who live on the surface level, trying our best to make the outside look good. In fact, I would argue that we would do more damage to ourselves, to others, to the witness of the gospel when we just kind of pretend that all of what faith is looking the part. All through the scriptures, we're called to examine ourselves. Are we making space for that? Pascal, the great philosopher, said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's ability to sit quietly in a room alone. I believe it was Nouwen that said, solitude is the place, is the furnace for transformation. It's so much easier for us to be busy, to look at our phones, to look at our devices, to distract ourselves with friendships, to binge watch Netflix, to run from the burdens that we're feeling. But the essential call of the scriptures is to be in touch with the things, the motivations, the struggles that God already knows about. And if we're honest, the people closest to you might as well too. Like it might be, really what we're asking, Lord, show me me. Show me who I am. Show me how I'm wired. Show me what I'm pursuing. And the claim of the scriptures is that that's where we'll find invitation to real freedom in life. David was a guy that's integrated enough to surrender his inner world to God. And that's something else we see in this passage, that when we come to interior examination, we're not just being in touch with the emotion, but we're trying to live above compartmentalization, where we're like, well, that's a flaw, but hey, we're all flawed and that's no big deal. And I'm just gonna go about my business. I'm gonna go about my life. Thank you very much. So when I was a kid, I was dribbling a basketball and it got away from me and I hit this glass clock that was sitting on one of the end tables. And of course, the glass clock broke. Now at this moment, I'm at a place of crisis. What do I do in this moment? I can wait for parents to get home and admit what happened, or I can apply my brain to the situation and find a solution. And that's what I did. So I went to where the super glue was and I glued this thing together. And even though I knew that there was a Brady Bunch episode where that didn't end well, according to the Brady Bunch episode, I was just like, I'm going to give this a go. And so even though this thing had a huge crack that was shabbily glued together by an unsuspecting preteen, I just lived into this and I'm going to go with this. And so I actually felt like that's going to bring me some freedom, right? And what it did instead was it just kind of led me in a complete state of paranoia. Like I was constantly like trying to tiptoe around and like see, are they looking at it? Do they see? Do they notice? Do they notice that I broke this? I don't know. Like I hope they don't find out. And the reality was like, I don't know that I was good at hiding the reality of what happened. I know I didn't get in any overt, immediate trouble for breaking this clock. But what I do know is that there was a season in time where there was a real wall between me and my parents where I was in my own head. I was living in paranoia. I had strained my relationship because I felt like living in secrecy and shadow was a better way to live. I was unwilling to walk in the light, to integrate these compartments of my story, and to really just kind of say, hey, I did a thing. I wasn't trying to. I knew the rules. Can you help me walk through this? Knowing that the consequences wouldn't have been particularly pleasant, but this thing that it did to me, to where I had to keep up appearances and to look the part like I was playing it cool was actually pretty exhausting. And that's the reality for us. A layered and compartmentalized life, a life of secrets and shadows, often is a greater recipe for personal, relational, and social pain. So what David is getting to in this passage, and we see it in the middle pieces, he's acknowledging in the first part of the verses about how the things God knows and the ways in which he's delighting himself in the things that God knows. But as you get to Psalm 139, verses 17 and 18, you see a tension in David. You see the tension between how precious God's thoughts are. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Where to count them? They would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I'm still with you. If only God, now look at this. If only God, you would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord? Do I not abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Do you see a tension there? I'm delighting myself in your law. I'm finding myself in your ways. But then I kind of hate these people over here. What is David trying to do in this confession? He's trying to live a life that's a bit less compartmentalized than the one he's living prior to writing this stuff down. He's confessing to God that to pursue this one way is maybe driving him to compartmentalize in ways in which that are adversely impacting or carrying improperly his feelings towards other people. This is something that we can probably all relate to on some level. Rich Volodas says Christian spirituality often involves acknowledging all of our part selves, exposing them to God's love, and letting him weave them into the new person he is making. Right? The invitation of Psalm 139 is, God, help me to see these other people as you see them. How do we begin to do this well? Well, it's not, if we slow down, we might acknowledge that there's church self and work self and late night self and party self and Friday self and all of these different selves. But the work of really going below the surface is to say, how do I begin to integrate all of these selves in light of who I am in Jesus? How do I begin to think strategically about how to align myself more to the ways of God, and what parts of my story that I'm trying to kind of say, well, you can have this part of my life, God, but you can't have this part of my life. If we just continue to live that way and not in a place of surrender, we will ultimately lose and be robbed of the everlasting life that God is calling us to, the freedom that God is calling us to, because living that compartmentalization is exhausting. So a tool for me that helps me kind of see where I'm living compartmentalized is a little thing that I call the RPMs assessment. I didn't make this up. I saw this actually from a leader named Dave Ferguson. It's a journaling exercise that I do that helps me kind of see the layers of my life where I'm not walking in an integrated sense of who I am in God. So it leads me, this is a journaling activity, to make up a spot in my journal to consider R, my relational health, and to rate my relational health, my relationship with my kids, my relationship with my spouse, my relationship with my friends on a scale of 1 to 10. And then I add an arrow of whether or not it's trending upward, whether it's a push this week, or whether or not it's trending downward. I do the same with my physical health. Am I eating my feelings? Am I living in the world of French fries, or am I getting out and exercising and being active? How about my mental health? Am I honest about where I am mentally? Am I the burdens that I kind of find myself carrying, and how I'm carrying those things, and how I was carrying those things maybe even at the beginning of the week versus now? And then lastly, my spiritual health. Not because all of this is spiritual, but specifically, how am I carrying my spiritual habits? Am I just reading the Bible to prepare for a sermon, or am I delighting in the Word of God? Am I taking time to not just pray for people because I told them to, but to really center my life on the way of Jesus? And these things show me the areas of my life that are often compartmentalized. That's a tool, one of many that you could use to identify that compartmentalization and to figure out how to surrender and align yourself to the ways of God. And that's what we see in this psalm. Lastly, we see that David finds the courage to face his shadow, right? To ultimately take that moment and to submit that back to the initial piece that we shared, the idea of searching me, God, knowing my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts, to see if there's any offensive way in me, and to lead me in the way of everlasting, is to say, God, help me to lead out of not just my shadow self, but in the person that you are forging and creating me to be. Pete Scazzaro says a living encounter with Jesus is to have a living encounter with yourself. That's what this scripture, this psalm reminds us. That the narratives that we've absorbed, the community that we're allowing to shape us, the habits that we're carrying are things that follow us into our spiritual transformation. A lot of times we kind of think that in part of being a new creation, that we're not defined by those things. We're forgiven of those things. We're free of those things. But like a shadow, they kind of follow us. Again, consider David there, where amongst great leadership skills came real blind spots and weak spots that he often led into. Consider the fine line between solitude and isolation. And you can get a look at maybe some of the ways in which we live in our shadow self, right? I can be a perfectionist, which can mean that there can be great excellence of work. But it can also mean that I carry the burden of imperfection improperly. I don't find freedom in it. I find that I've maybe let people down. How do we look at and face our shadow? A couple of things that we can look at. We can look behind our actions and our reactions. Being busy is often the enemy of this kind of reflection because we just end up reacting to our circumstances. But we look at our actions and reactions, we can kind of see maybe a state of where our hearts actually are. Our situations will reveal the state of our hearts. So we can look at, are we medicating? Are we escaping? We can look at the genogram to look at the patterns that we've absorbed. We can understand maybe some of the trauma that has informed, or the difficulties that have informed actions and reactions that are at the surface level of our hearts. We can think about the narratives that we've absorbed, and when we type them into the Google machine, there were 40 other algorithms reinforcing that narrative for us. To look at our shadow is to look at honestly and confess some of the ways in which we've been formed. We can also, if we want to see where our shadow self exists, we can look behind our words. Jackie Hill Perry says, our words reveal what our hearts hide. Where are you complaining? Where are you not just critiquing, but you're actually living in a place of bitterness? If I were to look through your phone at the text messages that you sent or the emails that you sent, I could probably get a sense of the shadow self that might be haunting you right now. Maybe it's the need to fit in, or the fact that you're honestly just dealing with some unresolved anger and frustration. I can also look at our emotions if we want to get a sense of what's behind our shadow. We can look at not just our anger, but like what's driving our anger. Instead of just saying, hey, would you stop being anxious? We can actually begin to examine what's making us anxious. The invitation of the gospel is not to stop being angry, stop being anxious, but to understand what's motivating that anxiety, what's motivating that anger, the emotions that are driving that the cross of Christ might reshape and reframe. So a great tool for you to do today, to be in touch with these things and to maybe kind of face the shadow self of your leadership so that you can live in a way that carries those things properly, is to ask ourselves 4 questions. Maybe set a timer to do it. What are you mad about? What are you sad about? What are you anxious about? And what are you glad about? If you took some time to do that today, you could get a glimpse at the things below the surface that might be bubbling or churning or driving our motivations to just kind of keep hustling, but all the while we're carrying Him properly. The invitation of the mercy and grace of Jesus is that the good news is that we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we've ever dared to believe. And yet we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. As we move to a time of communion, may you rest in that mercy today, and may you be invited as you see how the gospel speaks to these things below the surface, this beautiful invitation to not have all of our situations disappear, but through Jesus to learn to carry them properly. Grace and peace to you.